Before spending too much time analysing the fight, I think first things first, it's worth commenting on what a great job Eddie Hearn has done with Tony Bellew getting him in this position. Tony Bellew is fighting Adonis Stevenson for obviously the light heavyweight championship this Saturday night out in Canada. He's coming to the ring with a record of 20 wins, 12 wins coming by way of KO, one loss and one draw. The loss coming to Nathan Cleverly via points, the draw coming in a recent fight to Isaac Chilemba. I think Hearn has done a really good job of positioning Bellew into this fight. First and foremost, it's fair to say that Tony Bellew is not the most fashionable fighter. He's not the most known fighter outside of the UK. I think what he lacks is a sort of real sex appeal in his record in terms of the opponents he's beaten. He doesn't seem to be a massive knockout puncher. He doesn't seem to have electric skill in the sort of speed sense of the word, certainly. I think it's a really, really decent job of Hearn to have got him in this position. He, if I'm brutally honest, is not someone who I would view as a world level boxer. I think when he came up against Nathan Cleverly, I think that's the other thing, is obviously this is his second attempt at winning a version of the world light heavyweight championship, and I think given the fact that he lost in a close fight, but in a fight which he definitely lost first time round, it's particularly good work from Hearn to be getting him back in the ring against a name as big as Adonis Stevenson in his 23rd fight. I think there's a few problems with Tony Bellew. He's been down a lot of times in his career. He was down against Bob Agisof when he fought for the Commonwealth title. He was down against Oval McKenzie on 2 occasions in the early rounds in their first fight. He was down against an opponent whose name I don't recall, a relatively unknown journeyman in one of his early 4-round fights. He's someone who can be hit, and he's someone who, I'm not saying he's a bad defensive fighter, but he's someone who's imminently hittable, and he's not someone, whilst he's never been knocked out and he's never been stopped, and fair play to him for that, he's someone who has been known to hit the canvas, and from my recollection has hit the canvas, a good 4 or 5 times in his career already. Now this is my concern with Bellew here, is he's someone who can be hit, he's someone who can be put down, and at the same time he's someone who can be outpointed and outclassed. The fact that he, in that Cleverly fight, there was a few times Cleverly looked a class above in terms of his movement, in terms of his hand speed, combination punching. The fact that he drew with Isaac Chilemba, I know Isaac Chilemba is a very sort of tricky fighter who comes to spoil. He's a difficult man to look good against, but this is what concerns me about Bellew, is what is Bellew actually bringing to the table in terms of world-class level. He's not bringing massive and punching power. He's not bringing an unparalleled technical ability. He's not bringing the world's greatest chin. And this is why I think he's a good fighter. He's a solid yardstick. But I do not see Tony Bellew as a world light heavyweight champion, especially given the strength of the division. I mean, put simply, if he lost to Nathan Cleverly, who's subsequently been found out so much by obviously Sergei Kovalev, if we're now saying Nathan Cleverly isn't a world title level fighter at a light heavyweight, I don't see how Tony Bellew is. And I think it's easy to forget in this. I know certainly a rival promoter has criticised Eddie Hearn in the past for taking his fighters out and making them fight internationally or in the States and getting them beat. But I think this is a real good bit of promotional work from Eddie Hearn to put Bellew in this position. As I say, for a fighter who's not, he's not the biggest name, Bellew, he's not the biggest draw. The Canadian fans aren't going to be too aware of him. And, to get this fight in a diary for Bellew is a really, really decent promotional performance from Eddie Hearn, in my opinion. Now, what I'd also say is Adonis Stevenson, I know, most boxing fans will only be aware of him in the most recent year or two, but he is not a young man. I think he's in his mid-30s. the clock is ticking for Stevenson, and he's made it clear he only wants to take the biggest fights and the highest paydays so he can maximise, opportunities for his legacy and for his earnings before he calls it a day. So, in terms of the superstar names on Adonis Stevenson's record, it's only his more recent fights that he's really stepped up. I know he's been campaigning at super middleweight, and I think at one point he was mandatory for Frotz, but Frotz went down to Kessler route instead. But the only real names on his record at light heavyweight certainly are Tavoris Cloud and obviously Chad Dawson, both of which he's stopped. I think what impresses me about Adonis Stevenson, and his power is obvious. Everyone knows that he can, knock individuals out left, right, and centre. He's an absolutely massive puncher, as we saw against Chad Dawson. But against Tavoris Cloud, who he's a decent high level boxer. He didn't knock him out. He made him retire, I believe, or you stopped him in 7 rounds, and he won every round. He controlled that fight. He bullied Tavoris Cloud. Not only a massive display of constant power punching, but also a display of ring generalship, technical ability, great movement. Remember, there was one point, I think, in the second round where he was outworking and outmaneuvering Cloud so much that he put Cloud down on the floor without throwing a punch, just by being elusive and drawing him in and then wheeling out the way and putting Cloud off balance and getting him down on the floor. And this guy's got great accuracy, great punching power, decent hand speed. We've already highlighted the fact that, Tony Bellew can be hit, and when he gets hit, he can be dropped. He's been dropped at Commonwealth level, at British title level. I fear that at world level, against a puncher like Adonis Stevenson, if anyone's taking consistent punches like that, they're going to be in big trouble, and I think Tony Bellew will likely get stopped in this fight. If for whatever reason Bellew's chin turns out to be a lot better than what I expect it to be, I still see this as a points win for Stevenson. I don't really see Bellew having too much of a chance in this fight. Stevenson showed against Cloud, what a decent fighter he is and how he can sort of win rounds, and he's not just about knocking people out left, right, and centre. He certainly looked a lot better in that fight than, say, Bellew looked against Cleverly. Bellew looked against Chilemba. And I know Bellew had, moments in both of those fights, and they were both very close fights, and they were fights that arguably could have gone either way. Yeah, but Bellew didn't seem to be a different league to either of those two fighters, whereas, Adonis Stevenson did look to be a different class to Chad Dawson and a different class to Tavoris Cloud. So I've got Adonis Stevenson 2 or 3 levels above Bellew. I think Adonis Stevenson's victory over Chad Dawson is very, very impressive. I mean, people forget Chad Dawson was probably everyone's number 1 in the division. If you look at his record, he'd beaten Thomas Ademic, he'd beaten Glenn Johnson, he'd beaten Tarver back in 2008. He'd beaten Bernard Hopkins, who a lot of people would now say is the number 1. Well, Chad Dawson beat him a few years ago when Hopkins was a bit younger, and Adonis Stevenson got him out there in 1 round. Dawson's 31 years old now. He's not an old man. I know he's had a few fights. I know he'd had some difficulties with losing the weight to fight Andre Ward, but Adonis Stevenson took him out in a round. Adonis Stevenson then won every single round of the fight against Tavoris Cloud. He's the real deal. I don't see this as a particularly tough fight for him. I think there are tough fights out there for him in the division. Obviously, Hopkins being the obvious one, Sergei Kovalev being another one. There are definitely tough fights out there for him. I don't see Bellew as a massive puncher. I know he's got 12 stoppages, but he's not someone who tends to knock people out early. As he's climbed to the higher level fights, against Cleverly, against Isaac Chilemba, he hasn't been able to score knockouts. He's fought 12 rounders instead. There is a question over Stevenson's chin. Stevenson got knocked out by Darnell Boone, a victory which a defeat which he later avenged. But the fact that he got knocked out by a relative journeyman suggests there may be some question over Stevenson's chin. He's certainly been caught before and had his lights put out. I don't see Tony Bellew as a big puncher. I don't. see him as a one-punch knockout artist. Certainly, I don't think he's got that single-punch knockout power, and I don't think, you know, he's going to cause Adonis Stevenson too much in that. I think either way, whether it goes to knockout, I think Stevenson's got the power advantage, and whether it goes to points, I think Stevenson's got a technical ability, you know, to win this fight comfortably on both sides. I think most likely, you know, the fact that Bellew's quite hittable, the fact that he's been dropped several times in his career against much lower level opposition, my bet would probably be on a knockout in this fight. I don't think it will go more than 4 or 5 rounds. I'll be very impressed if Bellew makes it past then. Obviously, I'd love a Brit to have another version of the world title, and I'd be absolutely delighted for Tony Bellew if he did win. But I view it as very unlikely. And I do think it's a very strong bit of promotional work from Eddie Hearn to get him into this position and to get a lesser-known opponent against someone like Adonis Stevenson, an opponent who's already had a world title shot and come up short. So I think fair play to Eddie Hearn, fair play for Tony Bellew to taking the fight. I wish him the best of luck. My prediction for this video is that Stevenson will prove to be in a different class to Tony Bellew. And as I say, my money would be on a knockout, you know, in the first 4 or 5 rounds of this fight. Wouldn't surprise me if it came even earlier than that, but we will see. I'd be interested to hear from any Tony Bellew fans. Do they see any chinks in Stevenson's armour? How do they think Bellew's going to go about securing the win? And what are people's thoughts? Thanks very much for watching. Please do leave your comments below.